Is psychology good or evil? Now, to most people, this might seem like somewhat of a silly question, similar to asking as if, is chemistry good or evil, or is anthropology good or evil? However, if you were raised with the modern sensibilities that we have in this more progressive and inclusive society that we've built in the 21st century, and you were transported to any period of American history, including the present, you would be horrified at the hundreds of ways that psychology has been used to justify and enable racist, sexist, and oppressive systems in this country and beyond. Now, of course, psychology in the modern day has become broadly a vehicle for good. For example, clinical psychology has allowed people with mental illnesses to seek treatment and diagnoses, which allows for more understanding about themselves and their emotions and what they may be going through. And it is also a very, very helpful way for social and cultural analysis. However, in the 1800s, it was also a very helpful tool for social and cultural analysis, just that it was used in a way for these things that in the modern day we would almost universally recognize as being a major negative for the advancement of the common good and society as a whole. For example, IQ is something you hear about on an almost daily basis. Another thing you probably hear about on a daily basis is Irish people. Now you might be confused on what link these two have, however, you just need to look at Ireland under the colonial rule of the British in the 1800s. Now during this time, there was a ruling elite of ethnic British who sought to justify their subjugation and rule over the Irish by claiming, essentially, that the Irish, who in scores of tests on IQ and intelligence had scored far lower than the average British person, were thus part of an inferior racial mix, the supposed Iberian Irish race, which had African origins, according to them, and thus were doomed to ignorance if there was not any foreign intervention to help their civilization advance. These were heavily based off of recent theories created by Darwin in recent decades in the 1800s about human evolution. And then I would describe them as being very loosely slapped onto ideas about the human mind and how intelligence works, because if you use Darwin's theories about human evolution, which one of the main ones being that evolution takes thousands or hundreds of thousands of years to occur, it's a very slow process, it's very surprising that the Irish managed to, after independence, managed to evolve themselves somehow in a few decades, after building educational facilities and infrastructure in rural areas especially, and their IQ rate managed to skyrocket to being the same as the average British person, and actually higher than the average American by the 1990s, standing around 96. Another thing I would love to horrify you with is a man named Samuel Cartwright, who, operating out of his offices in Mississippi and Louisiana, created multiple completely made up, and I want to stress completely made up, psychological disorders to justify the enslavement of African Americans in antebellum America. One such completely made up mental illness that he created was dysphagia aethiopica, or translated literally, bad Ethiopian feeling. It was supposedly a mental illness that caused a lower amount of neurological activity in the brain of black people, and was supposed to be treated by stimulation of the skin, which served as a justification for the horrific psychological and physical abuses that field slaves went through on a daily basis. And he was also seen as the go-to on science in the South, and particularly by people who supported slavery and wanted to justify its moral evils that were self-evident to most of Northern society at the time, to justify and enable this horrific stain on the American consciousness. Imagine, though, this was not the first nor last time that psychology was used to justify oppressive or destructive systems, as another way that it was used was in the concept of eugenics in the 19th and 20th century, particularly in the sterilization of the supposed undesirables of society and to justify their position as such and the violence used against them. For example, from the 19th century, and in limited cases today, we have forced the sterilization of prisoners and criminals guided by the pseudo-scientific belief that this will somehow reduce criminality in both the gene pool and society. This, of course, has a long history dating back to the eugenics movement, as mentioned before, which has emphasized the supposed hereditary nature of societal ills, which could be cured by purifying ethnicities or races, and specifically your mental state and physical state. And examples of this, we can look at our great state of California, in which from 1909 to 1979, over 20,000 individuals were forcefully sterilized, in which Latinas in particular had a 59% higher chance of being sterilized than non-Latina women, guided by the racist belief that if Mexicans came into this country and had children, then they would degrade the mental and psychological or whatever stock of California. Not only directly related to, but is used in the same arguments that blame black people, and specifically the psychology and culture of black people, for higher crime rates in black majority communities, which is used to justify interpersonal racism at a day-to-day level, and worse, used to justify the massive expansion through legislation or industrial expansion of the prison industrial complex, which has created a cycle in many urban communities in America of poverty, over-policing, and systemic racism. Of course, despite all of these horrific ways that psychology has been used in the past, it should not let us shy away from the amazing and outstanding benefits that it has had for tens of millions of people in this country alone in the modern day. We choose to use psychology in a socially beneficial and inclusive way, particularly in relation to clinical psychology. The aforementioned tens of millions of people in this country have been able to find diagnoses, for example, for mental conditions which they might not have fully understood before, and are able to find greater emotional understanding about themselves, as well as the promotion of social acceptance of people with mental illnesses, which is a stark contrast from the total campaign of annihilation and selective breeding and dehumanization that people with mental illnesses have had to go throughout history for literally millennia. Overall, I would say that the question of is psychology good or evil is a very reductive question, as any scientific field can do great social harm or great social benefit when applied in a way that is oppressive or inclusive. I believe, above all, that people have the power to move forward and not repeat the mistakes of the past and the present, but rather build a psychology that values human life and that can bring benefit to millions, if not billions, of people around the world who struggle with mental illnesses. And yes, this has been a TED Talk by Nicolas Martin. I hope you have enjoyed it. Have a wonderful day.